And now, Hollywood Prospectus.
Yeah, we making it there for the camera, yo. We making it for the camera. We wasn't really scared.
Hello, and welcome to the Hollywood Prospectus podcast. My name is Chris Ryan. I am a writer for Grantland.com, and on the other line, is he rushing or is he dragging? It's Andy Greenwald!
I just realized something, man.
What's that, brother?
We've been doing this show for like almost 3 years now.
Okay.
Do you think people know I'm also a writer for Grantland.com?
I think it's implicit in the amount of questions I ask you about things you've written.
That's a strong counter. Okay,
Yeah.
I was just worried. Like, I feel like at this point in our show's life
That would
cycle...
be great if you weren't a writer for Grantland.
I'm just
I was like, dude, in your new piece on Grantland, and it was just like not there.
Look, I just feel like at this point in the life cycle, we should be looking at everything. We should be willing to tear it. We can't be afraid to be great anymore, Chris. You know, we just can't be.
I love your EOY, end of year enthusiasm, man.
It's strong.
Your fin de siècle enthusiasm.
Ooh. Yeah.
Andy, we're going to talk a little bit about Homeland today. We're going to talk a little bit about Sonic Highways.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about 90s indie rock, which was something I wrote about last week, but we wanted to lead off because whenever we get a chance, whenever Andy fires up the old projector and pulls down the screen and gets back involved in the Cahiers du Cinema, we always like to check in with the foremost thinker in the cinematic art form. Andy, you saw Whiplash this past weekend.
Chris, I want to paint a picture for you. Are you familiar with the beloved art house film Cinema Paradiso? And how it's the story about a broken down Italian theater and the affection for art and humanity that is evinced by portrayals of a projector, a guy who like works the projector, and a young boy.
Uh-huh.
That's basically my apartment.
Great.
That's just my life.
Because I had it, I really just imagined your apartment as like a massive wire corkboard where you're trying to plot out what Bryan Singer's X-Men Apocalypse is going to look like. Just like little cutouts of Cable time jumping.
I'm just like, but how will they represent Blink? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's also here in my apartment. I have a very large apartment.
Well, you bought.
Yeah, I saw a movie, man. It was cool, and I actually, I saw a movie the other week. I saw 22 Jump Street, but I guess we aren't going to talk about that. You want to talk about
a couple weeks ago? This is where he's at. Is he's just like, yo, me and my wife just watched 21 Jump Street. Is 22 Jump Street available yet? And sometimes Andy does ask me very Googleable questions on text message, which I always appreciate. And I'm just like, nah, B, it's not out yet. And he's just like, damn.
I think the childless have more time. I just feel like I know you're busy, you work real hard, but I just felt like on it was probably a Saturday afternoon for you, and maybe you were just.
I mean, we have the same access to search engines, though.
I just mean maybe you were staring into the middle distance and just wanted something to do.
I love queries. Yeah,
I'm just wondering, and I think I also
love
asked
being
you,
your Ask Jeeves.
Friday, I was like, should I watch Whiplash or is Snowpiercer too weird? And you actually cautioned against Snowpiercer and said,
well, you were
fire
like,
up Whiplash.
Will my wife like Snowpiercer? And I was like, probs not.
And
then there was another point where you asked me recently if you were like going to watch like Imitation Game or something, and I was like, if you go see that before you see Whiplash, we're not going to be friends anymore.
I said
that's how strongly I feel about Whiplash.
I was going to go see Nightcrawler. I had like a spare 120 minutes, and I was going to go in the middle of the day and see Nightcrawler. It sounded good. It looks good.
Well, you saw Whiplash, and Whiplash.
I was given a screener, so I did see it.
I mentioned earlier in a couple weeks ago, I think, whenever I saw it, I was like, this is probably my favorite movie of the year. I'm seeing Inherent Vice tomorrow, so I'm pretty excited about that. That hopefully I have huge expectations for that. But Whiplash is like probably it seems weird to say this, but it was probably the best time I had at the movies this year.
Tell me about the roller coaster ride of you watching this movie. I want to know.
Just went up, man. Never came down.
You just tell me. You be the boy in Cinema Paradiso. I will be the ghost of cinema, and you tell me what that experience was like.
I just thought that this film felt
because we're going to talk about it, right?
Yeah,
we're just going to talk about it.
Yeah, please. Like I felt like this film felt very alive to me. There's a lot of things in it that you have seen in other movies.
Do you want to set the stage? I feel like anyone listening probably has seen it, but we should probably.
Nobody's seen this movie really. It is still in theaters. I think if they're smart, they're going to put it on demand soon so that more people can see it. Because I don't know, it doesn't seem like they're rolling it out very well. It is about a jazz drummer in a conservatory played by Miles Teller, who you may have seen in Project X or Spectacular Now or That Awkward in a Moment. And he's going to be in Fantastic Four as Dr. Reed Richards coming up soon. He plays a jazz drummer in a musical conservatory. He gets picked to be in a notoriously competitive and hard driving band run by a very hard driving band leader named Terrence Fletcher, played by J.K. Simmons, who you may remember from doing unspeakable things to people on Oz.
Or is Dr. Skoda on Law and Order?
He's also on a lot of in some insurance ads.
And in the Spider-Man films that Chris loves so much.
Yeah. So these two meet, and it's basically from, about 25 minutes in, it turns into Full Metal Jacket with jazz. It's about like the making and breaking and possible remaking of this kid who wants to be a great jazz drummer, and this teacher who thinks that the only way to forge that kind of greatness is through emotional and near and sometimes physical abuse.
Chris, do you remember when we introduced a thing on the show where you were the fixer? You were the closer, and you would just you would be the dude giving the one note in the back of the room.
Right.
Could you imagine if you were at that screening on the Fox lot or whatever in 1989 when Stan Kubrick brought in Full Metal Jacket, and you just lean in at the end of the movie and you were like, no, I liked it, but what about jazz? What if you were that guy?
Man, I mean, I would basically be Robert Evans by now.
But also, it was '89, so you probably had like shoulder pads in your Armani suit. You were probably just like gacked to high heaven. Like I feel like I want to see that movie. Anyway, yeah. Here's the thing about Whiplash. So the guy who made it is a guy named Damien Chazelle, right? Mm-hmm. And has he made any other films?
He made a somewhat experimental, like Cassavetes-ish film. I can't remember the name of that is available on iTunes, and he's got.
Chris, you just volunteered the information you made fun of me for asking about.
What?
Is it available?
Oh,
I just need to know how I can watch this. All right.
Yeah, he does have like a first film that has been well respected, well regarded.
Here's the thing that's pretty amazing about Whiplash, and I had some problems with it, and then I didn't have, and all those problems melted away by the end. Okay. It is a movie about jazz. It is a movie about a drummer, so it's a movie about rhythm, and it's fitting that its own sense of rhythm is almost impeccable.
Yes,
it is a movie that is totally spare and cut to the bone. And that is so rare to see, I think, especially from young filmmakers making, who usually, it's like in some ways, it's not dissimilar to a novelist who thinks, or even a musician, your first album, your first book, you have to get everything in there because you never know if you're going to make another one.
Yeah. Yeah.
This movie is so economical and spare and lean. I can't think of a single frame you could take out.
It's like
a
great middleweight fighter.
And I was so impressed by that just from the very beginning, because in the early part of the movie, after we've sort of seen our kid playing drums, seen him at school, we've been introduced to J.K. Simmons' character. What's his name? His name's my name, Andrew, the main character. Yeah. We see him. The one thing that he does outside of school is he goes to the movies with his father, who's played by Paul Reiser, late of the Paul Reiser Show.
Yeah, they go to like a film forum type place.
And there's a interaction with the father over popcorn and candy that lasts maybe 18 seconds. And in this scene, they say nothing of apparent value in terms of the world, but they communicate their entire relationship in 18 seconds.
Yeah.
And it comes down to whether they're going to eat the popcorn and the Raisinets together or whatever. It's an incredible piece of writing for the screen that I feel like I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot more about the movie, but I feel like that was representative of what I really admired about it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has moments. It's a very kinetic movie, so the moments of silence are very profound. It's very loud, cacophonous. It's usually got drums.
Imagine the part in Birdman where there's a guy drumming, and imagine that for an hour and a half.
I think I would compare this movie to the way I felt. Not necessarily like on the same level, obviously, and it is Paul Thomas Anderson week, so I thought I'd just throw a shout out to that. But this is kind of like how I felt when I saw Boogie Nights, where it gave me that kind of visceral joy to like see a camera move, to see performances, to see a story told with such flair and knowledge of subject and just passion for subject.
Yeah.
if I told you that we were going to I wanted to go see a movie about a jazz conservatory, I don't think you'd think it featured some of the most dexterous cursing and profanity since, the last season of Veep or something like that. It's like a lot of fireworks going off in this movie. And I don't know. I'm kind of curious to hear what you didn't like about it, because it doesn't have very many people who are who equivocate about it. Most people are pretty into it if they've got a chance to see it.
I think two things. One, I think it definitely suffered that I wasn't watching it in the theater, because I think that it is such a taut and kinetic experience that I think the fact that I was able to pause it to run and get a drink, that's not ideal for this movie. I would have rather been just trapped in my seat having it come at me. I think that I also wasn't really aware of the tone of the movie is also one of escalation. It just builds and builds and builds and to a pretty clattering crescendo. And I think that it's the kind of movie where I appreciate it more having seen the journey that it took and the landing that it stuck, as opposed to while I was watching it. There were a couple moments that took me out of it.
Okay.
There's a pretty outlandish and surprising event that occurs 3/4 of the way through.
Yes.
That in retrospect I'm totally into, because that was the movie. But in the moment I wasn't sure on. And there's a dinner table scene that reminded me of the classic Sopranos dinner table scenes, where you'd have this incredible mob stuff, and then it would be like Dr. Melfi complaining about NPR.
Right.
And he'd be like, I don't know if people really talk like that. But because first of all, who could ever complain about NPR? It is a glittering media city on the hill. Anyway, I had a couple questions about it before we move on.
Sure.
One thing that was pretty interesting about the movie to me was the way that it didn't waver from the unlikability. I hate that word, so I'm trying to think of a better one. The problematic personality, let's say, let's just leave it at, how about just the personality of the lead, of Andrew. And I was curious in your mind, because I'd actually never seen Miles Teller in anything. I just knew who he was. How much of that comes from his performance, which is just really uninterested in being appealing in some ways. That makes it sound bad. It's not. But it's not. He's not playing to anyone's sympathy with his performance. How much of that comes from his performance versus the way the character is written and shot?
Well, he's pretty remarkable, I think. I've heard people compare him in this movie to some of those early Dustin Hoffman performances.
That's a good comparison.
And he kind of also has a very similarly his face looks like it's been punched. You know what I mean? It kind of has that lived in. It's not this immaculate gorgeous sculpture of a face.
He's not a leading man.
Say Ryan Gosling or something like that. He at times, I think, especially in the really commercial stuff he's tried to do, like that awkward moment, can't get out of his own way. He clearly, I really like Miles Teller, and I think Miles Teller is funny, but I think Miles Teller also thinks that Miles Teller is funny. And, he does a lot of what seems like unnecessary riffing in other movies. In this movie, I think that he, like you've mentioned, it's really stripped down, and I think that he does just enough to imbue Andrew with some personality, but not so much that it isn't consistent with the character.
I think the best thing about it, this is really part of, his performance really contributes to this, but I think the best thing about the movie, and again, it's impressive that it was made by a young person, relatively young person, and starring a young person, is that it refuses to settle on either side of the movie's central debate, which is can you be an artist and a human being?
Yeah.
And I really appreciate
also,
that. There's a way for them. There's a different version of this movie in which the Paul Reiser character, who plays the father who just doesn't understand something in his son, where that divide between them is seen as a tragedy, or is seen as a failing on one of their parts. As instead of in this movie, it's demonstrated, not demonstrated. It's depicted as something. It's almost scientific. It's like the way Paul Reiser looks at his son is the way he would look at a test tube, something. It's I can't believe who this is and where he came from. I don't relate to it, but I want to understand.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a major question that this movie asks, which is what is greatness, and what do you have to do to achieve it, and whether or not exactly. the ends justify the means.
Yeah,
because it's who cares if he's a good jazz drummer, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things right now, jazz is not a particularly important American art form. Nobody, if I asked you to tell me who the greatest living jazz drummer was, could you name him or her?
No.
Right. So that's one of the most interesting parts about the movie is that it's like it's purely about the competition, to borrow from There Will Be Blood, that certain people feel inside of themselves to be great, to be the best at something. And what happens when that person finds the kind of, they're already covered in kerosene. They find somebody standing around with a match,
Yeah, and I also think what it did so deftly, and it was really interesting to watch, was touch at this idea that I think about a lot, which is that anybody who's in the pursuit of anything, doing any kind of work in any field, can easily fall into a relationship with someone that is based on validation.
Mm-hmm. Very much
and, so. It can be doctor-patient, it can be father-son, it can be writer-editor, it could be podcast co-host. I don't know. But it could be a situation where, you are giving everything up to someone else in hopes that will somehow win you back something, approval, acceptance, respect. But you're basically, by doing that, you are locked in a circuit that is really only about these two people. It has no bearing on the greater world.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to watch this character. He gives up. He doesn't give up. He sacrifices a lot physically and emotionally for the respect of the J.K. Simmons character. And, in the end, we're not going to say what happens at the end, but what has he achieved?
Yeah. And does he get that acceptance and affirmation that he's looking for? Does he figure out that he can circumvent the J.K. Simmons' character's approval? It's a great ending to a movie. Like,
there's a moment of recognition at the end.
Yeah, I think so.
It's pretty amazing.
I think so. The director, Damon Chazelle, who we featured on Grantland a couple of months ago, Kevin Lincoln wrote a piece about him. He has said that, and I don't know if this was like one of those things that was tossed off that got picked up by blogs, but he has said that, and I suppose this is somewhat of a spoiler if you haven't seen Whiplash, so maybe skip the next 30 seconds, but that in his mind, Andrew has a very dark next few years.
Yeah, and
that's not an uplifting ending for him, that he basically like lives out the rest of his days as a sad drug addict.
Well, but let's just look at it. Let's just say one last thing that's relevant to my interest. This is why movies are movies. Mm-hmm. You don't have to tell the next few years.
Yeah,
you pick your spots, and when you're making a movie, the thing that makes a movie so hard is you have to pick the best spot to begin and the best spot to end. And I think this movie did that.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know, as you know, Chris, I am no chronicler of the American cinematic tradition anymore. But do you know what this guy Chazelle is doing next?
Because, he's making a musical.
Well, interesting. Well, he certainly has the camera
with Miles Teller. I don't know who the female lead is. I can't remember.
Is it Paul Reiser?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually the second drummer who keeps getting fired in Whiplash.
Oh God, it's actually a meet cute.
Yeah,
here's something. Can we? I just want to make a quick comment about something I know nothing about.
Did we not give enough credit for? So I wanted to ask you. There is one scene in particular, the first tryout that the Andrew character has for this jazz band, that I think is eventually going to be one of those scenes that people quote, and that like I think I already threw a gif of it in like an NBA shoot around. Like, but the "Are you rushing? Are you dragging?" scene. I mean, what did you think of that?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. It gets that kind of, there's a mania to the scene and to the performance and to the writing, and I think absolutely the direction, where you just find yourself laughing.
And the pacing too, because you know it's coming, but the way it starts out with him sort of seducing him and falsely propping him up.
It's sort of a horrific kind of laughter that you can't help.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, this movie is so good and promising, and it was exciting to hear he's doing something ambitious next. And I wanted to say something that I know nothing about, which is I'm hopeful when I hear things like that. I see this movie, and that guy, is it J.C. Chandor or J.D. Chandor?
J.C. Chandor. Yeah.
J.C. Chandor made All Is Lost with Robert Redford last year, and then he's made this movie that I'm dying to see, A Most Violent Year. With Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain. And it's kind of amazing. And obviously this is just timing. A lot of people who make first movies have other scripts, and they rarely get to make them the next year with such an incredible cast. But it's kind of exciting that, young, I guess you could call them independent American filmmakers, are diving right into big swing-taking genre-type stuff. And these guys are not yet making X-Men movies.
I think it's also that these movies are there to be made because Hollywood has kind of abdicated that
Yep. Yes. Well said.
So you're not going to see a movie made about unions and trucking in New York City in 1981 made by Disney, probably. You know.
Well,
I mean? Like,
Disney, when they bought Marvel, also bought the rights to US1, a not at all popular comic book about a blonde-haired trucker.
Are you being serious?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I had a copy of that. So I'm just saying, intellectual property, man. It's awesome.
The more you know. So, Andy, I know we talked about this last week, but we had another really good episode of Homeland on Sunday. So let's talk about that really quickly.
I just wanted to say that the first 20 minutes of this week's Homeland, the episode was called 13 Hours in Islamabad, were tons of fun.
Tons of fun in Islamabad. Why don't you call the episode that?
Why isn't the slogan of Liberty Travel? Why aren't the people who work at Liberty Travel out on the streets being like, I can offer you 13 hours in Islamabad. And that would be super fun. I can put you in a locked room.
Give you a belt.
With a lot of interesting people. I can offer you a belt. Look, this is what happens when a show stops worrying about being good or smart or important
or prestigious,
or prestigious, and is just kind of fun.
Yeah.
Now, a death-riddled hostage situation is not necessarily anyone's idea of fun, but when you make a TV show that is thrilling and taut and surprising, that's fun to watch. It was a pleasurable experience not knowing what was going to happen and being along for the ride.
Yeah, it was a fun. It was a good episode. I mean, like, it was very, very enjoyable. They did. I mean, you rarely see action done particularly well on television, and almost never on Homeland, which has sort of suffered from some very bad special effects. If you remember the CIA building blowing up. Remember the CIA building blew up in Homeland?
Do you remember that no matter where Carrie goes, there's essentially another major catastrophic terrorist-related event?
Yes.
And so when Lockhart is like, the president is no longer comfortable with you representing our interests?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry to paraphrase myself here, but that's what I wrote a thing about, gasoline being like, I don't think matches are representing our interests well anymore.
But still,
like, that's a terrible
Carrie was
idea
out here
to
with
keep her there.
the M16 defending the Jeeps.
Again, that's another thing. I'm like, that's fine. Like, I would rather see Carrie with an M16 on her shoulder taking out a sniper than ever again going to a Dwayne Reed and having a prescription filled.
I liked that basically they took three like crazy what if situations.
Yeah.
What if the convoy got hit? What if Martha had to decide whether or not to let her husband kill himself? And what if Lockhart had to choose between disavowing basically like all these secret agents throughout Pakistan or saving Farah's life, and neither work out for him? There was a lot of just like, what's gonna happen moments. And
couple things. Nazanin Boniadi, who plays Farah, I had the pleasure of meeting her a few months ago. Probably one of the most beautiful human beings I've ever been in the presence of in my life. I would definitely come out of the safe room.
Well, I would. She is not on Homeland anymore.
She is not on Homeland anymore. And it's a shame, but it also kind of makes sense because, a young woman in Hollywood needs to be in the Ben-Hur remake.
Is that what she's doing?
Yeah, with your man Jack Houston.
Interesting.
But the other thing is, I think that was there were echoes here of a lot of the problems that Homeland had. I mean, there are things that I wouldn't say they came due, but like Farah, I think, is a really interesting character played by a strong actress that they just didn't know what to do with, because she was essentially ended up being an idea. Let's have a Muslim American woman in the CIA, and what would that mean? She didn't really have anything to do. She basically got to play a little bit of the Saul role in terms of being a moral conscience, and then now she's gone.
Right.
They didn't know what to do with her. I think that the Lockhart character has always kind of been a capital B buffoon, so him acting like that was silly, but not out of character for a broadly drawn character. I think the bigger problem was, we've talked before about the very thin bench that the show cultivated over a number of years when it was just busy chasing Brody around the world.
Yes.
Michael O'Keefe this season, as John, what's his name, was
legendary character.
Was so memorable. I know. I had his name in front of me and I just blanked on it. And I still don't remember it. But anyway,
you can Google it.
Such a memorable character. Hey, Chris, is his character name available on Google Play? My point about that character
John
is
Caddyshack, secret agent.
We all want to call him Noonan. He was great in this part, and it was a great part. And the thing that I wrote in the piece that just went up today was that, unlike the sort of very broad strokes heroes and villains, like just cowboying it up, that we have in Carrie and Quinn and even Lockhart. This was just a very ordinary guy doing an extraordinary job.
Yeah, speaking of cowboying it up, turning over the crazy keys to Quinn was a pretty good idea, too.
Well, wait, I'm getting to that. So I understand why when you have 3 rocket-propelled grenades launched at an SUV and everyone survives, like someone is going to not survive, and that was obviously going to be that dude. But it's a shame because I think the show going forward needs as many characters like that as possible, not just as potential chum, but as counterweight to the craziness. That said, you, Chris Ryan, co-host of the Hollywood Prospectus podcast, writer at Grantland.com, over a year ago, you were like, here's this version of Homeland I want. And it's just called Peter Quinn, Dark Ops Samurai. Maybe you didn't say those words in that order, but essentially that's what you said.
I did say Peter Quinn, Ghost Recon or something like that.
Yeah. And so that's why you have that character. That's why you have all of that on the show. And if we never see anyone else in the cast again for the rest of the season, I'm thrilled.
It also is a nice role reversal where now Carrie has to be the responsible one. It's like it's smart writing.
Yes.
Let's talk quickly about this new jailhouse hanging.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's how you led this morning. Chris, you guys know Chris comes in with a strong intro on the podcast. Chris likes to make his presence felt, on the G chat as well early in the morning. Like what is that for you? Like 6 a.m.?
A solid 6:42. And I'm just coming in with hot belt jokes.
Hot belt jokes, which we won't repeat now, but
just don't think that couple thought out their options very well.
Just long-term career planning?
Yeah,
like they
first of
they
all,
should have consulted with their Merrill Lynch accountant?
Why did that guy think that his suicide by her belt would save her career? Let's assess what Martha's overseen in her short stint in Pakistan.
Her short but busy.
Yeah.
Busy
so
stint.
They had to trade Al-Qaeda prisoners for Saul, right?
Well, this is after the
her
head of the CIA.
Her husband is a treasonous spy.
The head of the CIA station, while under her tenure.
Oh, yeah, he got beaten to death.
Beaten to death in the street.
Yeah. And then she was like, and then that dude and then her husband was a spy, and the embassy is overrun by terrorists. All on her watch. And all information related to all American exercises in the region are turned over to Osama bin Laden 2.0. Yeah, and so she's probably not going to have a great mid-year progress report.
She didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
And but then her man, Duck is like, here's the golden ticket. You just give me your belt and I will hang myself and our son will feel better about it and you will still have a career. It's like, she's not going to have a career, man. I just got to tell you, like, look at LinkedIn. There's a couple of people out there looking for work. She is not going to keep her diplomatic career going when you're hanging by her Prada belt in a cell.
Couple things.
Also, it's not like they would have to be like, where'd you get that belt, man?
Yeah, I know.
They wouldn't need David Caruso to figure that out. It'd be like, women's belt. Which women visited this guy?
In the last 10 minutes.
Yeah. While we were being overrun by terrorists.
Think of Toby, why don't you?
Toby
did not get much burn in this season, but all of a sudden,
Toby and the vice president's son are somewhere.
What if again? I don't.
Finn, is that kid's name? Did he die in the blow up, in the explosion?
Yeah, he got blowed up. Good. Listen to me here.
Not laughing.
What is Toby's Tuesday like back in the U.S.? Like, what time is it when all this is going on over there?
First, he gets punched in the face by a classmate because his name's Toby. Somebody's just like, "Yo, Toby, go get my sandwich, man."
Good morning. It's time to pay the Toby tax. Which is just
and then that's like on a good day. What happens when they're like, your dad straight up sold out America's position in Pakistan?
Do you remember how Benedict Arnold used to be like the go-to name for treachery? Well, guess what? Dennis Duck Phillips, or whatever his name is. He is the dude who just got 1,000 people deaded.
Toby is definitely getting picked last in Ultimate Frisbee, man.
I just say, yeah, exactly. First of all, Toby is just like a sophomore at Swarthmore. Like, he's definitely just like, he's just doing his work. He's just really committed to sociology major. Maybe he's going to go to some sort of a protest. I don't know. Like, he's just engaged in college life.
Yes.
And then his phone rings and it says, "Mom, cell phone."
No, it's Martha. He's been calling her Martha since he was like 6. He's like,
"Oh, Mom." you know, and he's she's like, let me just bullet point it for you, Toby.
Here's an update.
Here's an update.
You didn't respond to the last family group email, so I thought I'd call.
Here's the biggest thing.
When I put it in the subject line, emergency, call me back, dad traitor.
Or just like, about dad.
Yeah, about dad.
You know that's what it says. Some things about dad.
And then, do you think Martha like immediately updated her Amazon wish list with belt?
Do you think she immediately updated her LinkedIn personal status to, you know, like not unsure or single?
Entertaining other positions? Yeah.
Yeah, a couple things. Here was my main, I mean, before we even got into the Toby stuff, is it a safe bet that today's ambassadors are wearing belts? Because I feel like there are a lot of options for the modern workplace woman. And not all of them involve like hangable belts, because also it can't just be like a thin,
seriously,
light,
Martha
it can't be like
is
a
keeping
TJ
herself
Maxx
in
thing.
shape. What do you think? How long do you think that belt is? This is grotesque to be talking about this, but this is still a thing that bothered me well into newsroom last night.
Well, because luckily nothing bothered you after that, or America. So I'm glad that we're picking the right fights here. But yeah, so basically a lot of it hinged on a belt. And, you know, I also like a show, and I don't even know if I mean like in the way that we usually mean it in English, but I like a show that was so devoted to its nuttiness,
sure,
in this case, where the feeling it was going for with Dennis was that we were at the end supposed to be like Martha and be like, what a coward. He couldn't hang himself with a leather belt in a prison.
In the basement of the U.S. Embassy.
Like, when people talk about the show being like 24, I'm like, okay, I get it in some ways, but there's a part of 24 that they're talking about like the sort of crazy things keep happening. They're not talking about the sort of just like
do you think that they
stars,
just were like
stars and stripes streaked macho fantasy that a lot of 24 was? And part of that fantasy is being like, you sicken me. You couldn't hang yourself, you adult man with a family.
What about Toby?
Think of Toby.
Toby would rather have, oh, look at this, man. We're laughing and joking about Homeland again.
It's fun. Just like old times.
Just like old times.
I'm psyched. There are 2 weeks left. It's just gonna be a blast. I'm happy.
Let's briefly turn our attention to the world of music.
I'm into you saying everything is briefly. You're trying to control me, and I will not be hemmed in. You could not put a belt around this.
Oh my God.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
We were going to talk about music. We were going to talk about your favorite show of the year, Sonic Highways.
Honestly, can I give you a little spoiler here?
Yeah.
Top 2 shows of the year from your True Detective and Sonic Highways, which I think means I need to be put into a capsule and shot into the sun. Don't you agree? What am I doing out here, man?
You're just appreciating You're just appreciating life. You know,
I like what I like.
I'm happy about that. It adds to the frisson of the show.
I don't think I have had a more enjoyable television experience than watching these 8 episodes of Sonic Highways than anything else this year. Like, I look forward to it. I savor every moment. I don't mind the stupid parts. I can fast forward them. Even the stupid parts are often funny. It's so many musicians that I already loved, so many musicians that I then went and checked out because I saw stuff about them on this show. Great interviews, awesome footage. Has lots of problems. There's like basically no women but Bonnie Raitt and Nancy Wilson on this show. It's a very specific narrative about American music, basically told through the perspective of Dave Grohl. And it's also got a lot of Foo Fighters, which might be a turnoff for some people. But I just was like, the show is awesome. The show had Trouble Funk and Bad Brains and the Meters and Jimmy Dale Gilmore and Steve Earle and Fugazi is on this show. I mean, like, it's on HBO. This is crazy.
It's weird.
Yeah.
And I think that I watched some of it. My knowledge is not as encyclopedic of the show as yours, but I think that you can't really praise the show or you can't praise it without criticizing it. It is what it is. And what I mean by that is the things that make it good are the same things that often lead it astray. And no one but Dave Grohl and his bona fides and his friendships and his relationships and his money and his film crew would have gotten access to a lot of these people.
Yes.
Like a lot of those DC people aren't going to talk to just anybody, and they're not going to talk to just anybody who's in a platinum band. But he grew up there.
Well, also the reverse is
he
true.
knows them.
Like to talk to those people, you with this kind of platform, you have to be someone like Dave Grohl who could get HBO to be like, yes,
right.
you can make an 8-hour show.
Yes, because we're going to be in it.
Yeah.
And
if you and I were like, we have a really good idea to go around to city and talk about like the musical legacies of a bunch of cities, like they would just be like, no, you know what I mean? Like, and most people would say no to. But
Yes,
it's somebody like Grohl where he's like, not only do I want to do this, but I have a very specific story I want to tell. I mean, it was just the Seattle episode especially really got to me, and I didn't expect that at all. I mean, it has some of the same beats of stories that we've heard before about how grunge evolved and how it was capitalized on by corporations and the sort of fallout from that. But I have to admit, like the Kurt stuff, which is, I mean, it's hard to say whether it was I found it very personally affecting to watch the Kurt stuff in the Seattle episode.
I haven't watched that episode yet, and I will. I just
Your
thought,
boy Ben Gibbard's on that one, talking about the day you heard Kurt died.
That's my man. Yeah, I thought the other thing about it that I appreciated is that only having a musician or having someone like Dave Grohl can be in those conversations with the guys in Bad Brains, with the guys in Trouble Funk, with the guys in The Meters, and talk specifically about why the drumming was special.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, that sentence makes me, either I'm a character in Whiplash or, or I'm not the type of music fan that I usually think I am, because usually that sort of technical stuff doesn't interest me. But it was fascinating precisely because it's almost never covered. That said, the flip side of cultural coverage is maybe the broader strokes, and I feel like the show kind of botched some of that. I mean, just the DC episode begins with news footage of Martin Luther King being assassinated and talk about the riots in 1968, and then it shows young Dave Grohl at his parents' house in the suburbs and like him going over what a goofball he was in pictures.
Yeah, I think that's what he does in every episode, where it starts something wide angle and then it's like, and here's how that stuff kind of related to me. And you can knock Dave Grohl for that, but then you have to knock like literally 99% of what's written on the internet right now, which is taking something universal and being like, here's how it matters to me.
Fair point. Yeah,
which is exactly I've been doing that a lot recently. Like it's not. That's a move. You know what I mean? Well, people don't generally respond when you're just like, here's my straight up like reported piece, you know?
No, and fair point. I just think it was a little clumsy in some ways.
I think actually the one thing worth pointing out, and I just wrote this thing today about,
this is what I want to talk about.
Taylor Hawkins, the drummer, is that the other cool thing about this show, aside from all the musical history stuff that you get, is a picture of a working band. And even if you don't particularly like Foo Fighters music, I think they have like a bunch of really good songs, including
they have very few bad songs.
They have like the one songs that is like a decade good, like Everlong is still like amazing song.
It's one of the best rock songs the last, I don't know, 25 years, 30 years. Yeah. I don't know how old we are anymore, but it's a great
you get
song.
To see them interact, and it is kind of interesting picture of like this band that is probably like been working for about 7 or 8 years past their like what would be the rational stopping point for like how many ideas Foo Fighters have. But they've continued to go because, like, in the absence of any other big rock bands. I mean, I don't mean to be disparaging towards Foo Fighters, but I do think that they have happened to benefit from the fact that people like that kind of music, and there's no other band to kind of shove them out of the way.
I also think it's worth saying that, and this is something that I really admire, is Dave Grohl's true talents are probably not being a songwriter and frontman. He's very good at those things. But he is really good at, as we see in this, he's really good at finding reasons to be inspired, at connecting people, at communicating certain values and ideas. He certainly hates electronic music, so maybe that's not his best argument. But the fact that, as you said, a band that is a little bit past their sell-by date, I mean, I think that he would probably agree at this point that he doesn't necessarily have something groundbreaking or urgent to communicate or to say, but he came up with this idea as a way to connect with cities, and which I believe are really important, and musical traditions, which are really important, and to use his, I don't know what it would be. It's a
stunt,
his
but
celebrity.
Considering the other stunt we had this year was U2 inserting an album on our iPods and just being like, "You're welcome." This is a pretty cool stunt, and I just wanted to say, like, I mean, so you get to know the guys in the band a little bit better, and the person who comes out just, like gangbusters is Taylor Hawkins.
Please read this piece Chris wrote. It's my favorite thing on the internet at the moment. It's so funny.
I mean, this dude just like likes to roll up in the roll up in the spot on a mountain bike, and like just doesn't give a shit about like where he is. He's just like, where are we? And they're like Preservation Hall. You know, it's like like the most important musical landmark in America. And he's like, cool. So it's like a bar.
This guy, can I just tell you that this is from personal experience? I can tell you that this is not an act, because I did a Foo Fighters cover story for Spin in like, God, I don't know, like 2006. So when they were recording the double album, I think.
Oh, is that Wasted Light? What is that one?
I don't remember. I don't remember. No, I think that was the one after that. But anyway, it was one they recorded like, this is such a Foo Fighters move. They had a double album. One was electric and one was acoustic, you know?
Yes.
Because you got to keep it's the McDLT of albums. You know, you got to keep the hot side hot, the cool side cool. So I went to their studio space in the Valley and hung out with those dudes for a really long day. And they are exactly that. They are incredibly nice professionals.
Yeah.
You know, which again, that sort of is a tough sell for music journalism. It's a tough sell for celebrity in any way. But they couldn't have been nicer and couldn't have been more accommodating. And Dave Grohl is everything that he appears to be. Like he's a thoughtful and very kind guy. But Taylor Hawkins, he just kept coming in. He was sober at this point.
Yeah.
But he would basically, every so often I'd be having a conversation with like Chris Shiflett or whatever, and Taylor Hawkins would just come into the room like the Kool-Aid man, just like kick in the door and just yell something about whatever it was he was doing.
Yeah,
and
like, I'm listening to Queen.
Here's what I have to say about Taylor Hawkins. I had this great day, good times, chatted about stuff, whatever. Leaving, jump in my rental car. We're starting to drive away from the studio, and I look out the rearview mirror, and Taylor Hawkins, in my memory, he's shirtless, but that's because I actually have no visual.
It's totally like
cues.
it's like 80% possible.
Yeah, I have no visual reference for him wearing a shirt. So he's running at my car, like full speed, and I brake urgently, you know, and he runs up to the window, and I haven't even rolled down the window, so he's banging on the window, and I'm like, hey, and he goes, dude. I'm like, yes, and he's like, do you remember? And I, you know, Joe, put your finger on the button. He's like, do you remember that Joe Walsh album I told you about? And I'm like, I guess, because if we're being honest here, he probably told me about 7 Joe Walsh albums in a 20-minute interview. And he's like, it's out of print, dude, but I got it for you right fucking here. And he hands me a CDR that's written on it in Sharpie, and I'm pretty sure he just wrote on it Joe Walsh.
Do you still have this?
Yeah, I think so. I don't. It's in my CD wallet that I used to take on trips back in the 19th century. And I don't remember the name of the album that's on it because he never wrote that album. I listened to it. It's great. It's a Joe Walsh album.
Yeah, so you got to go back and listen to every Joe Walsh album and match it.
I'm just saying that this is a man. He's the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back if he wore a shirt. Since he doesn't, he will give you the Joe Walsh CD out of his Discman.
That is about as well as you could possibly sum it up. So I would watch Sonic Highways if you have a chance. It's on HBO Go. And if you're looking for just a couple to check out, I would do DC, New Orleans, because it's pretty interesting, and Seattle for sure.
So since this episode, the theme of this episode is Toby. The theme of this episode is really good things that you wrote on the internet.
Come on.
I want to talk about this other piece that you wrote last week that moved some people.
It moved some people, did it?
It touched the hearts of people. Chris, you wrote last week about the reissue.
Box set.
Is it a box set? The box
set of the 3 full lengths and 2 EPs from the Dallas. Well, not really the Dallas band, but from the band Bedhead.
And what you wrote about, though, and please go read this piece. You wrote about your days working at Newbury Comics in Boston, days I remember very well. And you talked about what it was like, the sort of the promise and the mystery of discovering music in a pre-digital era.
Sure.
And I found this piece really engaging, and not just because I remembered your metalhead boss that you mentioned in the piece, but you know, I'm going to come clean with you. I never liked Bedhead.
No, I know. Now, lots of people.
I went back and listened to Bedhead after reading this piece, feeling like just ready, you know, just swollen with possibility. Like, what did I miss?
Yeah.
I still don't hear it. I don't hear it. But
I thought you would like them because they're basically like a slower seam, and I know you were into seam, but this is like a really good example of what we're talking about. Is these fine margins these like little differences that would happen. And, you know, there was like, just like now and just like always, there were bands that everybody more or less agreed on in indie rock around the mid 90s, like that Pavement, Guided by Voices, you know,
Archers of Loaf.
People liked Archers of Loaf. People liked Liz Phair, you know, I mean, like people generally liked, you know, Yola Tango were really big, you know, Spoon was starting to kind of happen a little bit.
And let's also say, quote, really big.
Yeah, I mean,
so let's put a big
there was
asterisk
generally
on
like
that.
if it was on Matador, Touch and Go, and
Merge,
you know, people were pretty into it, and there was bands like Superchunk and Pavement that were very popular. But then there were like all these other bands that, you know, there wasn't really a delivery system or like a cataloging system for them. You know, you would buy stuff because you maybe heard from a friend that it was good because the cover looked cool, because maybe you saw them opening up for somebody else that you liked, or you had read a blurb usually in the back of something like Magnet or, you know, a zine, or, you know, maybe you even heard them on college radio. But those were the ways that you heard. And even all of those things, and the thing I was trying to get at in the piece was just that there were not a lot of second chances. If you missed that issue of Magnet, if you weren't listening to college radio that night on a Thursday at midnight or something, and if you didn't happen to bump into someone who told you about these bands, there were probably 100 bedheads that I never heard that are bedhead to somebody else. And they're just like, this band is so important to me. Nobody really knows about them. Like, nobody loves them the way I do. And because there wasn't that just sort of, as soon as something goes on the internet, you know, it's Googleable, and you can find it, and you can do a deep dive on it, and you can find out about the people in it. And that probably is better in some ways for the artists, but it definitely takes away some of the adventure and mystery in that goes along with, or used to go along with, listening to music, which is something I was just sort of nostalgic about.
Bedhead is a really good example too, because they actually loved that themselves, and so they didn't put pictures of themselves on their records,
Sure.
and they were intentionally sort of obtuse. But
that was like a radical thing. I mean, there's no pictures
Yeah.
of Pavement, you know, in the first few albums.
No, that's right. But I mean, the thing that it's not just what you just said, although that was a big part of it. What I was really responding to was the real sense of risk and mystery, and I mean, you said the word adventure, which I think is probably right, that went into it in a time when you had to spend real money or dedicate real hours to learning about something and listening to it.
And you had to make
often,
decisions. I mean, the decision-making part of it has kind of been taken away, which
That's right.
in some ways is it, you know, you probably have more disposable income now than you would have if you were a 19-year-old back in 1995. But the idea that you would have to decide between two pieces, that's why, I mean, that's ultimately why music reviews were even a thing, is because they were trying to help you make those decisions between a Velocity Girl record and a Ladybug Transistor record or something. If that's
and there was probably no way you'd be able to hear either of them.
yeah, or
buying
I mean,
it.
like you might be able to, but once maybe, like, you know, there was some. Remember how Blockbuster Music used to let you open any CD?
No.
Don't you remember that?
Seems risky.
Yeah,
No.
you would be able to open it and listen to it, but you had to like stand there in the aisle and listen. I remember listening to the Paul Westerberg solo record, 14 songs.
I remember Repo Records, which was an important record store for us in Bryn Mawr, PA. They would let you, if they had it open, you could listen to it on a Discman they had in the store.
Yes.
Which was incredibly exciting. And I would just spend like hours standing there listening to stuff. But it was particularly fast. I mean, obviously there's a nostalgic element for us because this was how we discovered music, but it was really profound to sort of realize that that is a world that is completely gone. And that is a huge part of my life that is absent from my life.
Yeah.
Like that. And I was trying to I mean, this might be too big of a jump. I was kind of trying to, I probably someone else has made this connection. I was wondering if one of the reasons why people are super into food, for example, is because, and I'm super into food. I like staying alive, but it's because it is a tactile experience that you still have to be present for.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I had not thought about that. That's a really good point.
The thingness of it hasn't been removed. Whereas before we had to, you know, save up, you buy the object, the CD or the album or the 7-inch, and you sort of obsess over it and you hold it and you have it. You think about it. And even, you know, this comes up a lot. We had a staff email chain going around this weekend that was about music. And I was racking my brain trying to think of records, and I missed my shelves of CDs, but I don't have anymore because I could just look at it and remember the things.
Yeah.
But so you don't have to track down, like, if for someone listening to this who's never heard Velocity Girl, you don't need to go to your local Repo Records or whatever to listen to it. You just go to Spotify and you can hear all of it, or go to YouTube and see it. But if you want to know what those really good soup dumplings taste like in Alhambra or whatever, you probably have to go drive there.
And also, if somebody comes up to you and is like, if you go up to someone and you're like, how are those soup dumplings in Alhambra? And that person is in a bad mood, or that person doesn't feel like talking to you or whatever, and they're just like, they're not that good. Well, then you might not ever try those soup dumplings.
You're not going to go.
And that happened with so many groups where it's like people would just like, my early 20s, from my late teens through my early 20s were spent alphabetizing and putting away records in record stores. And there are so many records, and there were so many bands where it's like, God, these guys keep putting out records. I've never heard their music, whoever it was. Like, I'm trying to think of like a good example, but you just keep getting more and more blank records, and you just be like, man, who listens to this? And then it's like, not out of any like caustic feeling for the band. It'd just be like, I've never heard of it, so how could it be good? But then you'd be like, I'm the guy who likes Knapsack, or I'm the guy who likes, is super into a Minor Forest, or I'm a guy who really likes, Hefner. And it's, there are plenty of people who are like, why would you listen to Hefner, man? Like, who cares?
I was that guy.
I know.
You should listen to Hefner Universe. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you also, because you were on the other side of it, the camaraderie of the guys who are working at the record store with you, like the stories you would tell of like people putting on really obscure or intense records to drive out customers are more like hijinks and fun, as opposed to the, if you were that customer. With someone I was talking to about your article over the weekend was thinking about the culture of the sort of intimidating record store clerk. Now, you're a sweet guy. You were never intimidating. But that culture is something that people are not sorry to have seen gone on some level. But at the same time, at their best, record store employees who were invested were curators. They were sommeliers. Let's keep the food thing going.
Yeah.
They were there. They kind of were there to help you if you were willing to be helped, right?
Yeah. And well, I mean, yes, but they were not. They were not in the service industry. Do you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't. There was a distinction, I think, between like if you went into an eating establishment and someone treated you the way often record store employees treated their customers, you would just be like, that place has bad service, I'm not going back. Whereas as a record store, sometimes that bad service or sometimes that antagonism was part of the charm. And it was even part of the, like, just to tie it all back into to Whiplash, it was like you weren't going for what you already knew to be affirmed. You were going to be challenged. Right? Like, you would go and if you bought something that impressed a record store employee, you felt like you made the right decision. If they were like, oh, yeah, this is really good. Nobody's up on this.
Or you'd get the nod.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, the nod was key.
Oh, yeah, this is great. That's all you needed. And then you would take it home, and no matter how that record was, you'd be like, this is good. I don't know about you, but I love Rodin. You know what I mean? Like, I love Rodin, but like, that's an example of like, I'm sure you had records that you kept in rotation for like 9 months, just insisting that you liked it, even though you didn't, because
I spent money on it.
Exactly. And then you would sell those records back to buy another record.
There was a band on Touch and Go called Rachel's.
Yeah, man.
With the Possessive, and they basically were a classical music group.
Like chamber music a little bit.
And I just kept buying their records because I thought it was like somehow smarter or better, because they had violins. The other thing that was not around then, and that I think is interesting, it's not just the ability to listen to it, but the similar artists tab.
Related artists
tab did not exist. And so what we would be plucking at here would be individual stars, but not solar systems or galaxies. Mm-hmm. And that would lead you with collections, knowledge, mixtapes, whatever, that were really interestingly
curated
or disconnected.
Yeah,
almost.
Sure.
And I think that added that's kind of a good thing at times, not having.
Well, sometimes I would
picture.
just look at the back of records and see who produced or engineered them. So it's like if it was Albini or Brian Paulson,
that would give you an idea,
or the guys at Fort Apache or whatever. I would have a vague idea of what it sounded like or who kind of signed off on it. And that's why labels were so important back then, because you would just be like, if Corey Rusk at Touch and Go thinks this is good enough to put out, I'll check it out. If Gerard Kozloy thinks this is good enough to put out, I'll check it out.
I guess I'm just bringing it full circle to today. Today, Pitchfork ran a review of this band called Chumped.
Yeah.
This really young pop punk band, indie band that I really like. I like the record a lot. It's called Teenage Retirement, which is a great title. And Devin Maloney, who's written for us at Grantland, reviewed it for Pitchfork. I liked her review. She talked about a certain thing in music that she called auditory umami, which is the part where it's just like, it's food again, but it's the thing where it just puts chills up your spine when they hit the note in the chorus.
Yeah.
Or I was thinking about this record. When I listened to the record for the first time, I listened to it without any connections. And it was reminding me a lot of mid-90s indie. Mm-hmm. When I read the review and I saw other people, when I Googled it and started reading other people's connections to it, they were drawing out the early 2000s emo connections. Apparently the band really like Saves the Day. And then now that's pretty much what I hear when I listen to this record.
Right.
And it's almost unfortunate. I like that music too. I wrote a book about it. But I kind of liked Coming to It Blind, and it felt surprising and rare to do that.
Yeah. I mean, we were sort of talking about wishing we knew less, I guess.
I think we're talking about wishing we knew less. And I feel like that's a conversation we've been having about a lot of things as people who work on the internet. And so maybe we're just complaining about it because I think it's I think
we're
it's
also
probably,
just being like, I wish we were 19 again. You know?
Maybe, but I also
because whoever's
think,
19 now thinks, I mean, like they obviously think they've got it figured out. You know what I mean? Like,
and they do. That's
yeah,
great.
Sure.
I just mean, it's
I wish I was 19 now.
I hope it's easier. And I think it's easier to step out of the title pool if you're not actually, working as a professional. What lives in title pools? As professional algae? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to think that it's possible to step outside of it. But anyway, this was not meant to be like things used to be better. I just think that maybe, what we were going to throw some songs in a Spotify playlist from that era that sort of sums up that era to us. And it would be kind of interesting if people made playlists of their own kind of putting it together period.
Sure. I'd be kind of curious.
So it was, okay, so we're saying this was our 19 to, 17 to 23, so, which is kind of like the sweet spot for being a music obsessive. So what was your 17 to 23 people
Listeners.
of the internet world? Yeah.
What's your 17 to 23, Toby?
I'm just saying his 17 to 23 got dark fast.
Andy, we'll be back. We're going to do, you're coming out here this week, so we're going to
we're gonna do something.
some fun year-end stuff. But otherwise, we'll talk to you next week. And thanks for listening, guys.
And listeners, just, when you're on the flight to visit your dad in the Supermax, you fire up those Good Wife reruns and you just remember one thing. It's great job, Baranski!
Thank you for listening to Grantland. To hear more Grantland shows in your earballs, subscribe to Grantland Sports and Grantland Pop Culture on iTunes. Or go to grantland.com and click on podcasts.